Thank you, Mary, for being here and for your lovely film. Watching it another time, I was also a couple things. One, as a documentary filmmaker, of course, I'm impressed with the complexity and the weave, but we can talk about that in a moment. But also the many points of access, as I mentioned earlier, that I find or found in the film, and particularly the patterns of migration of grandparents who came from Anatolia, grandfather who, I guess, fled not to be conscripted and was an indentured servant in Alexandria. So these sort of patterns of migration spoke to me powerfully. And thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. I mean, it's a story that in some ways I use myself as a character, but it's actually not. I mean, it's about me, but it's not also about me. It's a kind of universal story, and obviously it speaks to Greek culture, but it doesn't only. So that's what I was using my character to sort of do, to connect with that experience of being forced out of your home or being displaced or not knowing who you are, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I was. It's set up very beautifully by the Greek American musician, who talks about remembering maybe even made up myths, which really I think spoke to me as thinking that my own history began with my grandparents.
Yeah, that's right. And Jim Sklavounos, who's was just a wonderful character in the film. But yeah, one of the I set him up first actually as a way of making that link to those histories that we kind of have to chart when you don't have facts, and that was very much the case with my family, because it was interesting when I was in Turkey. I was trying to find to see if I could get any of my grandfather's records of any kind, but of course the language changed from Ottoman to Turkish during that Greco-Turkish war and Turkish nationalism. So unless you can read Ottoman, there's no way you can access those files, and even if they exist. So it's such an incredible history of, erasure. And I guess in some ways it's about trying to, because you sort of live it. I felt like I was living it but didn't really know I was living it. And so the film helped me create, invent, but also experience stuff that was authentic, but I'm not entirely sure, I never found where my mother, I never really found out where she was. I never knew. But in fact, being there and seeing the country just sort of helped somehow. Yeah. I mean, Egypt,
It doesn't help that the Greeks are suspicious and don't like to talk
well, that's
about
true.
things.
Yeah, that's right. Well, there is definitely that holding in of experience. Yeah, for sure. So yes.
Well, I just have just before we get into questions from the audience, I just wanted to acknowledge a couple things about the filmmaking. One is just the poetry and the simplicity and power of and introspection of the voiceover narration. And also,
can I tell you something funny? Sorry, it's not funny. It's a bit tragic. They've just sold the film apparently to Swiss TV, and they said, they're not going to subtitle the whole thing. They want to change my narration to an Italian voice. I said, no way. It's like, how can you just subtitle it for God's sake? Because then at least you have the rhythm. Anyway, so sorry. I'm still a bit furious about that, and I'm hoping they're not going to do it. I mean, I can't bear the thought, because it's the film, those layers. The voiceover is connected to the music, it's connected to the sound, it's connected to the story, and to get rid of that element is to get rid of a sound of So yeah, even if you can't understand it, it's the rhythm.
Let me just jump a question here, and so. A lot, as you say, a lot of the sound, the texture of the sound, comes from the fact that
this is
you
recorded,
speak English with
isn't
an
it?
Australian accent.
Oh yes, I do.
And I'm wondering, for those of us who don't have relatives in Australia, if you can make some kind of a comment about the Greek-Australian experience, which is different than the Greek-Canadian or Greek-American, UK and South African experiences?
Yeah, they are all different, I guess, but there's a lineage, isn't there, of exodus, I suppose. And I guess there were different waves of migration in Australia. My parents came through a different moment in history. They came, as you know, from the exodus in a way from Egypt. But before that it was the war. So there were a lot of Greeks coming post-Second World War. And I think that's probably true in aspects of Canada as well and parts of America. Although I know a lot of Greeks came at the turn of the century. There was a lot of exodus at different moments in history, I think. And but I think maybe the difference with America was that maybe there's been a longer history of migration, so there's more established Greeks than perhaps in Australia, whereas Australia, I'm the sort of second generation, but maybe in America you find third and fourth more, so yeah. Anyway, this is me conjecturing here, so yeah.
Before we turn to the audience, I just have a question about research.
Oh, yeah.
This is just so phenomenally well-sourced research. The people that you found, that you produced to sit in front of you, your own, it just requires a lot of thought and a lot of work to get to the point where you're ready to turn the camera on in order to provide this complex weave for your enjoyment and education. The film took 4 years to make, and it went through about 7 or 8 iterations of the whole film. I cut and recut and then recut. And the research was quite intense because I had to do learn a lot. What you see is just the kind of moment of, an exposition. But when you do the research into Smyrna, into Turkey, into Egypt, there's so much reading and so much knowledge you have to gain to at least get some accuracy because it's so complex. The whole thing is so complex. But one of the great things that happened was the National Greek Archive gave me access to the early footage of Smyrna, and so I was able, and it was all digitised, so I was able to look at sort of hours upon hours upon hours of that footage, which became very important, even though you only see 2 minutes or something. But actually seeing all of that, it really shapes more of your understanding of what, particularly when in the Smyrna case there were so many British and American ships, and that was a while before they actually allowed the people that were fleeing the city onto those boats. So you actually see that. And so it's quite, there's a few movies out at the moment that you may have seen actually called Smyrna Beloved, and, it's not bad, it's a good account of all of that, but when you see the archival footage, it's quite astounding. So, yeah, it took a really long time to research, and for me, I have a PhD, I've been a scholar for a very, very long time, but filmmaking is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, to try to make it communicates something that will speak to an audience, yeah. So. As I tell my students, if it were easy, we'd all be doing it.
Yeah. So.
Question out here.
Did we want the mics? Yeah. Are you happy with that? Yeah.
Do I need to stand or?
I don't know. Whatever you like.
Well, I guess I might just.
Yes.
For the rest of people to be able to see. Well, I definitely feel the need to congratulate you on a most thorough documentary.
Oh, thank you.
It was very, I would say, breathtaking, and it definitely put across the idea about what the Rembetika is. And I don't think it's just me. I think most probably I'm speaking on behalf of the whole audience behind me. And I particularly like the shots of humor that you put into it. It really made it very lively.
Yeah.
And actually, there is a question after these 2 comments.
Yeah.
I don't know. I hope it's not too personal one. To what extent you found afterwards that the documentary helped you to find closure, if that's the right expression, or if it actually helped you get to your target, which was to reconnect or...
Yeah. No, it's a great...
Not necessarily reinvent yourself, but
reconnect
to what you feel that was somewhere behind?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, because one of the strangest things about making this film was I didn't expect any of that to happen. I was just sort of on this journey wanting to tell a story about the music and migration and forced migration, because the Syria civil war was happening at that time when I started, and it really came from seeing that experience in Lesbos when I was filming Dogs of Democracy. So I was interested in trying to tell a story about experience of that forced migration that's intergenerational, that goes on and on and on and on. You know, it doesn't stop just when people arrive on land, it keeps going. But then I found, actually, by the end of the whole process, and in particularly going to Turkey and Egypt, that I realised for the first time in my life that I actually feel Australia is my home. Like, I never felt that before. I always didn't want to live there. I always thought, why did my parents ever bring us there? I fought with them as an adolescent, which is, you always feel shameful now as an adult. Because I was growing up in the 70s in Australia in a very Anglo culture before even multiculturalism was a word, And so it was hard, it was hard. But somehow the film, for whatever reason, it did do some kind of healing, quote unquote. But it also was because of the magnificent people, that I met and had and also I should mention the musician, the composer of this film, Konstantinos Vita, who is perhaps one of Greece's best-known contemporary composers. I mean, he's an electronic musician, and so his music, he did a Rembetika concert around the time I started making this film. And the sound's very modern in terms of the soundtrack, but it's based on the melodies of Rembetika. So he's a genius. He's a genius, yeah. So that was also, having those connections were a real gift. So thank you for the question.
Is there another question back there?
Congratulations for your movie.
Ευχαριστώ.
I have a strong voice, you can hear me. Maybe I missed, but I didn't hear. Is the Rembetika starting in Smyrna before the catastrophe?
The Rembetika really starts as an urban sound in Greece, but what the sounds of the music, there's various, my point, I suppose, is that it couldn't exist without that kind of movement, but not only could it not exist without the sort of mass migration, it's also, the music comes from villages and country. I mean, it's just a kind of mixture of sound, but it becomes its own unique thing during that time, during the turn of the 20th century. But I think people like Marika Papagika were already kind of doing it, like they were using that kind of Smirnikor sound, and so So it's not. I don't think it necessarily starts in Turkey before, or Smyrna before Greece. It's more to do with the kind of movement of the music. If that makes sense.
Thank you.
So it's a good question, yeah.
Back?
Thank you.
And the village, I mean, all of the this is the thing about that wonderful busker in Thessaloniki who's playing the songs and, saying everybody's claiming them, and, and it's true, everybody claims these songs as their own, but then they become kind of incorporated into a culture.
Hey, first of all, absolutely stunning movie. Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure to watch. Is the mic working? Yes. Brilliant.
I can hear you very well. Thank you.
Awesome. So you briefly mentioned Dogs of Democracy, which, by the way, everyone, is available to stream on Canopy for free.
Oh, it is, yeah.
It is, yeah. I was wondering, how did the experience of making this film compare to the experience of making Dogs of Democracy, and how did this one build off your previous film?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. Yeah, look, Dogs of Democracy was... I loved making that film because, for those of you that don't know, it's about the stray dogs of Athens, and I tell this story about the Greek economic crisis actually through the stray dogs, and so and I love animals, so it's a kind of it's a homage to animals as well. But it was, I come from a tradition, I suppose, of documentary making, but I made public radio documentary, so I understood how to make documentary, but dogs was the one that really enabled me to bring it into cinematic form. But it was still, I mean, I'm proud of the movie, but this one I just learnt so much more because it was a lot longer, of course, too. But the storytelling, like this one really cut my teeth on storytelling because there was a version probably just towards the end that was not working. The first 20 minutes just were not working. And my producer was saying this and I was determined it was. And eventually I spoke to a story consultant and it was about learning how to put acts together and, you know, how to actually tell a story that had a rhythm and a movement and so on and so forth. So I learnt a lot about storytelling in this film, which now I'm doing, my next film is a documentary, but I'm actually going to work on a fiction film with an Australian writer. So I feel confident about how to structure a story in film. And I think that's what this film taught me because it's such a detailed story. Yeah.
Thank you.
But Dogs is fun if you want to watch it, everyone. For free too. Filmmakers never make any money if you make it.
Well, that was actually a little bit about my question. Again, I have to thank you. This is an amazing personal journey for you to share with the entire world, really.
Yes.
It hasn't been shown to the entire world, but I guess my question is, because of it being so personal, and you said it took about 4 years to make.
Yeah.
So finding sources to answer some of your questions, then the challenges of going from country to country. I'm wondering, like, was there a point where you thought the challenges were too many and you should stop the journey of this? Or were they, you had help along the way, you know, these fairy godmothers, etc., that would help you? Like what, I'm just curious about you personally and having to be able to come and share this treasure. This is amazing.
Yeah, look, I don't know. If I've got, you know, it's probably some kind of, you know, emotional deficit in myself. But whatever, when I'm determined to do something, I just will do it at all costs. And I think this is what happened with this movie. I kept getting, in a way, resistances because of money for a start, working with the right people. But I think I always wanted to make the film. And I think I was just determined to make it. And similarly with these next two films, I have no idea how I'm going to make I've got absolutely no idea. Because this time, the first two films, I've actually partially funded myself. My poor house has been mortgaged time and time again. But I have got some money from Screen Australia. But the future ones I still want to do. And it's some kind of, I found filmmaking, because I do come from as a scholar and so on, but it's like a calling. It feels like it's a vocation that I found late in life, and I can actually do it quite well, and I feel that it's just what I want to do. So I think it's something to do with that drive, which has no logic, has no, you know, it's just something that you just got to do, you know. So I think that's the only way I can answer it. I mean, it was very, very hard. Yeah, it was not easy. Yeah, lots of tears, let's say.
Thank you. One last question just popped. Are you aware or have you seen perhaps, I don't know, on social media or in other areas, people that have been inspired by what you did and like maybe Australian Greeks or Greeks from other countries or maybe not even Greeks that have been inspired by that journey of yours and have tried to copy it for themselves as a healing process, I mean?
Yeah. Well, only insofar as audiences, you know, like, and there was one, I showed it at a local library in my community in Marrickville in Sydney. And an ex-student of mine, who I hadn't taught for a long time, was a young woman who comes from half Philippine, half Australian. And she came up to me and she said, "Oh, you probably don't remember me," but of course I did, you know. And she just started crying. And she said, "Oh, no." It's like it really moved her. And she's like 22, and I wasn't exactly 23. Sorry, she's a bit older. And it was because it spoke to some migration history or something to do with her experience. So what I'm finding is I'm understanding it through the audiences at the moment, just how people are responding. Yeah, that's why I love I've seen this film so many times now, but I love watching it with audiences because every audience has its own kind of character as well. And interestingly, non-Greek audiences, because I've shown it to a lot of non-Greek audiences, they never pick up on the humour. So Greeks are always laughing at the kind of, the bits that should be laughed at in a sense, and bits that I'm surprised that people laugh at, but they do. And so it's really interesting to different cultural experiences, yeah.
Are there other questions? I mean, maybe someone is going to put up their hand. I want to share with you some of my favorite moments from the film, which resonated with me the first time through, but the second time through. The first one was when you find the derivation of your surname.
Oh, yeah.
So, because so many of us have made-up names.
Yeah.
The second moment for me, and this just speaks to my own ignorance, was when the priest, when the camera pans over to show the musical notation, which is all Greek to me. It was just like completely foreign to me, and I suppose many people know about this, but that was just a wonderful moment. And the third moment that I appreciated was when the singer at the end picks off some fluff.
Oh, no, yes.
From her husband's collaborator, which struck me as a particularly
yes.
a Greek thing to do, actually.
Yeah. It's that particular scene. Yeah. No.
I don't even know you.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. But what was very beautiful about that actually was I did want a cameraman to shoot us all together, but before I invited him to come, I just knew that I had to be there on my own with the camera, because I think if there was anybody else there, the emotion that Evelina was feeling would not have come across. I think she would have been more guarded, and so it just came out, her feeling, her depth of mourning, and I think it was, and I think that's why I like shooting myself. I like actually having the intimacy of just me and the interviewee, or I very rarely shoot with a crew. In fact, I hardly ever. It's only when somebody's shooting me that I'll use a crew. So all of the music I recorded, and so that's why there's a lot of bumps. There's a lot of bumps in the film, but in post-production you try to fix them up as much as you can, but then you have to leave a bit of wobble. So that was for me. That was incredible. Also, Lady Lash, when she was. It's hard to when you're in a theatre with all the 5.1 stereo. When she starts singing, I was getting goosebumps while she was starting to sing. When she started kind of singing Greek as well, like without knowing it, and it was just. And it really did feel like both of our ancestors were there. Her ancestors, our ancestors. It was like an ancestral moment of Indigenous and Greek and God knows what else. It was quite amazing, but everybody was amazing, that's what I love about documentary or filmmaking. You just meet these amazing people, and of course, so many people. That's why the credits are so long. There's so many people that just don't make it at the end of the day to the film because it just doesn't fit the story. And perhaps one of the other ones I have to say was the Sephardic Jew choir in Thessaloniki, who were just extraordinary. But it ended up, I had 20 minutes of them in one cut, but it just took the film off to somewhere else, and that deserves its own film, I think, the relationship between the Sephardic Jew music and Greek music in Thessaloniki during that war and pre-war period. Yeah, it's quite an amazing history, that history too. So. But yeah, it would have taken the story, and in fact it did take the story off into another direction, and it just didn't hold. So that's why the craft of storytelling really came out for me in this film. Yeah.
I would watch that movie.
Yeah, well, I hope somebody does make it. Like I've got so much footage, but yeah, I don't know whether I could. Yeah.
Is anyone here?
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you very much for this, for all the work that went into it, and for the final product. More of a comment than a question. I find that very often when people imagine Greece, they imagine Greece as a relatively monochrome place. And as a fairly homogeneous place that started kind of discovering diversity in the 90s with the fall of the Iron Curtain. And what the film does so beautifully is just expose the fissures, diversity, difference within what is Greece and a much wider Greek world that floats about this perceived metropolis. And as someone who works in a Hellenic Studies department and teaches students who are mostly non-Greek, and seeks to relate to them some sense of what this space is, I find that your film is an ideal instrument for taking that trip because of what it exposes of this diversity and of this complexity and of people coming from all over and somehow anchoring themselves on this place which they may have not even experienced at any time.
Yes. Yes, that's right.
A brilliant kind of line throughout the film.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean that's what I grew up with as well. This kind of imagined place, you know, that was Greece, which we were very Greek, you know, but it was never. We never really lived it in that way. We lived a different kind of Greek, you know, that kind of diasporic Greek as well. But yes, Negros Tomoria is perhaps one of the heroes of the film as well. I mean, he's just extraordinary, you know. And I mean, I had hours and hours and hours and hours of footage of him, and cutting him backwards. But it was also trying to tell that story. I mean, the reality really was wherever we would go, wherever I would go with him, we would always be experiencing some kind of racism. And one of the times was we went into this bar. There was nobody there, actually, absolutely nobody there. And the woman's at the bar just cleaning the bar, and we just said, "Look, would you serve us?" "Oh, I'm too busy." There was actually nobody there. And she wouldn't serve us. And it was only because of Kevin, I think, you know. And so that would happen time and again. And for him, that's a lived thing, and that's what I was trying to capture as well. The difficulty, you know, for all of us, you know, being outside of Greece, you experience it, your parents may have experienced it, but it's also internal as well. So it's complex. It's complex.
And you captured something specific and technical about only recently having received his papers.
Yes, exactly.
After being born in Greece.
Yes. That was such a big movement, Generation 2.0, when I was there, and I had to do quite a. So for those of you that don't know, if your mother, I think, wasn't born in Greece, but you were born in Greece, you still didn't have the right to citizenship. So there was a movement called 2.0 to people like Kevin to gain citizenship. So it was a big movement and a big legal change that actually happened with Syriza, I think. So it's quite a recent history. Yeah. From my understanding, I could be a bit technically wrong, but I think I'm right. Yeah. Anyway, he got his citizenship. Yeah, in 2017, 2018.
Thank you very much for being here and show us your product. It's great. Would you please tell us when the Rembetika started, before the catastrophe of Smyrna or after?
Yeah, that was yes. The gentleman at the back was. It started as an urban music in Athens after the fall of Smyrna, but the music and the sound was already being played in Turkey anyway, in different parts of Turkey. So my sort of line of argument really is that the music is influenced kind of by Asia Minor as well as other sounds. So, but the actually Rembetika itself as an urban sound, and the bouzouki in Piraeus is the kind of start of the 1920s, I suppose, 15, 16, after the war, maybe the First World War. Yeah.
the tavernas where they were underground, and they were playing the Rembetika when they started in Greece.
That was happening. So, well, Gail was talking about the underground tavernas, I think, more in the Second World War, but the tavernas were already going on in the early 20s. And so there's so much detail with the Rembetikas too, that they would often wear their coats in a particular way and have the baglama hidden underneath because it was illegal to play the instruments, you know. So there's so much detail in the dress codes as well, and that was a sort of their own language as well, you know. So, but yeah, I think that real taverna stuff was happening in that early 1920s. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I think. I have to say, I don't claim to be a musicologist by any means, actually. I'm sort of more interested in the kind of the cultural history and how that intersects with the music, yeah. So Gail Holst is far more knowledge. There's so many more brilliant, and the priest in the film, Father Karanos, you know. so many more people have much more expertise in that kind of history, yeah.
I mean, it's hard. You can't put it all in to a film.
Oh, it is, yeah. I mean, that's why you really have to distill kind of moments, yeah. Yeah, you can't do it.
Questions to keep popping up. I was wondering if you could share with us if the documentary has screened in other countries.
The film?
Yeah.
Oh,
If
yes.
you screened it in other countries, and
Yes.
if you could share with us perhaps an interesting reaction from an audience that you might have got from screenings.
Oh, yes, actually. There's been several. And one was actually when I showed it in Melbourne, the very first question was a woman who was really angry that I had the Greek priest in the film. Because she was really angry about the split between, you know, the left and this and that, and how the church had done all this bad stuff, and, you know, and that's not what the film was about. And so she went on and on and on and on. And I said, well, at the end of the day, I don't agree with you. The politics was a different thing. I was just saying, I'm just trying to use Father Karanos to help me make a point about the diversity of sound which makes up contemporary music. Like, that's how I'm using him. But that was kind of an interesting moment that happened straight away. But it has been shown. It has been shown in a lot of countries now around the world. It's still doing a bit of a little tour, I think. It's won a few awards, which has been nice as well. And in Australia, it's just been nominated for Best Documentary in our kind of Education and Industry Awards. So, I mean, it's a finalist. I don't know if, it may not win, but that was a surprising one. So it's been nice to, after all the hard work, to kind of get some recognition around it as well, and hopefully be able to use it as a springboard into making future films, as, you know, something that, look, I can, you know, show that it has some weight.
Well, I think if there are no other questions, then I'd like to thank Mary for presenting your film and for being here and being so eloquent about her experiences and so forthcoming.
And as I said, I'm so grateful that the streaming worked. So, so I was nervous most of the way through the film, I have to say.
Before we wrap it up here, I just want to acknowledge the support of the Stavros Niarchos Foundation in supporting this event, Hellenic Studies at Simon Fraser University, Dimitris Kralis and Lauren Gilbert, who organized this event. And thank you, the audience, for coming tonight.
Yes. Thank you all. Actually, I'm just going to do a little sales pitch. Actually, the film is actually available to buy, but I'll leave some flyers out for you if anybody's interested. Actually, for your libraries or whatever. I've got some flyers with QR codes, so just in case. Yeah, I forgot about that because, you know, every little bit helps, I have to say. So, yeah. So thank you.